Picture this. It's late at night, your house is dead quiet, and the only light comes from the flickering glow of your TV, spitting static like it's trying to tell you something. You're alone, or at least you think you are, but there's that itch in the back of your mind, that feeling that something's not right. Welcome to a night you won't forget, where we're diving into 12 true horror stories that'll make your skin crawl and your heart race. These aren't just ghost tales. They're real accounts from real people who face the unexplainable, the kind of stuff that lingers long after the lights go out. From whispers in empty rooms to shadows that move when they shouldn't. Each story is a piece of a puzzle that asks, what's hiding in the dark? Grab a blanket, lock your doors, and maybe keep a light on, because once we start, there's no turning back. These 12 tales will pull you in, twist your mind, and leave you wondering if the next sound you hear is just the wind or something else entirely. Ready to lose some sleep? Let's get started. In the quiet town of Asheville, North Carolina, the Bennett family moved into a century-old Victorian house on Maple Street. Rachel Bennett, a 34-year-old graphic designer, saw it as a chance to rebuild after a tough year. Her husband, Mark, a high school teacher, loved the house's charm, creaky floors, stained glass and all. Their 7-year-old son, Oliver, explored every corner, his laughter echoing through the halls. The move felt like a clean slate, a place to plant roots and heal. But Oliver's chatter soon turned peculiar. He started talking about a friend named Rose, describing her as a girl who played with him in his room. Rachel smiled at first, thinking it was imagination, but Oliver's details were vivid. Rose wore a blue dress, sang old songs, and knew secrets about the house. Mark shrugged it off, saying kids invent friends, but Rachel noticed Oliver whispering to empty air, his eyes fixed on corners where shadows lingered. The house, once warm, began to feel watchful, its silence heavier than it should be. Oliver's stories about Rose grew more frequent. He'd sit cross-legged on the rug, giggling, as if someone answered back, describing games of hide-and-seek in rooms Rachel hadn't shown him. She asked who Rose was, and Oliver said she'd always been in the house waiting for him. Rachel's stomach twisted. Kids didn't talk like that. Mark, ever practical, suggested Oliver was coping with the move, but even he paused when Oliver drew Rose, a girl with long hair, her blue dress smudged with what looked like ash. Then things shifted. Rachel found Oliver's toys arranged in circles, as if set for a tea party. A music box in the attic, broken when they moved in, played a tinny tune one night, stopping when Rachel approached. She checked Oliver's room, finding a small, dusty hairpin under his bed, its flower shape faded but delicate, like it belonged to another era. Mark laughed nervously, blaming mice, but Rachel kept the hairpin, its weight unsettling in her palm. The house felt different now. Doors creaked open after being shut. Oliver's crayons rolled off tables, stopping in neat rows. Rachel caught herself glancing at mirrors, half expecting a shadow that wasn't hers. She asked Oliver to describe Rose again, and he whispered, "She's sad because she can't leave." The words hung heavy, and Rachel wondered what they'd brought into their home. Rachel couldn't ignore it anymore. She searched online for the house's history, finding a 1940s newspaper clipping. A fire had gutted the attic, killing a girl named Rose Carter, age 9, who lived there. The details matched Oliver's stories, and Rachel realized Rose wasn't imaginary, she was a ghost. Her hands shook as she showed Mark the article, its grainy photo showing a girl in a blue dress, eerily like Oliver's drawings. Mark, pale, admitted he'd heard whispers in the hall too soft to catch. They watched Oliver closely. He'd hum tunes Rachel didn't know, old and mournful, as if taught. One night she found him in the attic, rocking, saying Rose was cold up here. The air was icy, though summer lingered outside. Rachel noticed scratches on the floorboards, forming a child's scrawl. Stay. She pulled Oliver downstairs, heart pounding, and locked the attic door. But the hairpin, left on her dresser, reappeared in Oliver's pocket, its flower now bright, as if polished. Mark called a local historian, who confirmed Rose's death was tragic, trapped in the fire, her family gone. The historian warned that spirits like hers cling to what's familiar. That night, Rachel woke to Oliver laughing softly, his door ajar. Peering in, she saw him holding hands with empty air, his breath visible in the warm room. Rose was no longer just a story. Rachel and Mark debated moving, but Asheville was home, and Oliver seemed attached, not just to the house, but to Rose. They felt uneasy knowing Rose's truth, wondering what she wanted from their son. Rachel tried talking to Oliver, but he'd clam up, only saying Rose needed a friend. Mark installed new locks, but they clicked open at night. Rachel burned sage, hoping to cleanse the house, but the smoke curled into shapes, tiny hands reaching out. She visited the library, digging deeper. A journal from the 1940s mentioned Rose's love for singing, her voice a comfort before the fire took her. Rachel froze. Oliver had been humming those same songs. She found a photo in the archives. Rose, smiling, with the hairpin Rachel had found. Back home, Oliver's drawings grew darker. Rose's face smudged, her eyes hollow, surrounded by flames. He whispered she was angry now, and Rachel noticed burns on his fingertips, faint but real. One night, the music box played again, louder from the attic. Rachel climbed up, finding Oliver asleep on the floor, the hairpin glowing beside him. The air shimmered, and for a moment she saw her. A girl in blue, eyes sad but sharp, mouthing, "Stay." Rachel grabbed Oliver, running downstairs. The next morning, they packed to leave, but in Oliver's bag, Rachel found a new drawing. Rose holding his hand, the house ablaze behind them, with "Forever" written in red. Early mornings in Portland carry a strange kind of stillness, as if the city is still asleep, not quite ready to wake up. My name is Clara, 23 years old, and I work at a small bakery on the outskirts of town, where my days begin with the smell of flour and coffee. I usually leave for work early, while it's still misty outside, the streets deserted, and the only sound is the echo of my footsteps on the sidewalk. The familiar roads, lined with shuttered shops and flickering streetlights, always bring a sense of peace, like a quiet promise that today will be okay. But that morning, April 16th, 2025, everything changed, and I learned that even the most peaceful moments can hide something terrifying. I left my house at 5 a.m., the sky still a dull gray, barely touched by the first hints of light. The air was icy cold, my breath forming thin clouds in the air. I wore headphones, played a soft song to keep myself alert, but kept the volume low so I could still hear the wind and the rustle of leaves underfoot. The main street that led to the bakery was completely empty. Not a single car, not a soul, just me and the blinking streetlights, like they were telling a story no one wanted to hear. I walked faster, not out of fear, but because the cold was creeping through my coat, urging me toward the warmth of the bakery oven. Then, I heard footsteps, not steady but uneven, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, as if someone was trying to match my pace on purpose. I stopped, pulled out my earbuds, and looked behind me. No one, just the long road and trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was nothing. that early mornings can play tricks on your mind. But when I started walking again, the footsteps returned. Closer now, clearer. My heart began to race, not from exertion, but from a growing unease, as if someone was watching me from just out of sight. I turned into a narrow alleyway, a shortcut I took every day to get to work faster. That was my mistake. At the end of the alley stood a figure, tall, thin, wearing a filthy gray coat, hair so messy it covered most of his face. He stood motionless, but I could feel his gaze, sharp, cold, like a hidden blade. I slowed down, tried to stay calm, telling myself he might just be a homeless man, meaning no harm. But as I approached, he stepped forward and blocked my path. He smiled and said, "Jesus loves you," in a low voice, almost a whisper, as if it were a secret meant only for me. Those words should have been harmless, comforting even, but something about his tone, something false, something twisted, sent a chill through me. I nodded, forced a smile, and stepped back. "Thank you," I said, voice trembling, hoping he'd let me go, but he stepped closer. So close I could smell stale cigarettes and damp earth clinging to him. His eyes, now visible, were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days, and he stared at me without blinking, like he wanted to hold me there. "You don't understand," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. "Jesus loves you, but I don't." I froze, unable to believe what I'd just heard. Before I could react, he leaned in so close I could feel his breath on my face. "I'm going to kill you," he said calmly, like reading from a book, his eyes full of malice, like he had imagined that scene 100 times before. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded wildly, threatening to burst from my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt nailed to the ground. All I could do was step back, my shaking hands fumbling in my coat pocket, reaching for my phone. He didn't chase me, didn't raise a hand, just stood there, smiling, as if his words alone were enough to trap me in fear. I turned and ran, didn't look back, my shoes pounding. The pavement, my breath sharp and fast, blending with the wind. The alley felt longer than ever, stretching into a nightmare with no end. I heard him laugh behind me, short, raspy, like a beast enjoying the hunt, but I didn't look back, didn't dare slow down. I ran until I saw the bakery's warm lights glowing at the end of the road. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys. My coworker Lisa stared at me, eyes wide. "Clara, what happened?" I stammered out the story, about the man, his words, and when I looked out the window the street was empty again, like he'd never been there. I was terrified, couldn't stop trembling. Even though I tried to work, his image haunted me. Lisa called the police, but they only took a report. There were no cameras in that alley, they said, and they advised I walk to work with someone from now on. After that, I never went down that alley again. I asked for later shifts, had my dad drive me to work, but every footstep, every unfamiliar face on the street made me flinch. The encounter left behind something like a scar, an invisible one. I kept wondering who he was, why he chose me, why he spoke of love and death in the same breath. Some said he was just mentally unstable, but his eyes weren't wild. They were calculated, cold, and unforgettable. The city moved on, the bakery remained busy, but I never saw the morning silence the same way again. I began reading about similar incidents, strangers muttering odd words before vanishing, leaving fear in their wake. One coworker once mentioned a man in a gray coat lingering near the park, mumbling about God. But no one knew for sure if it was true. I never saw him again. But I felt like he was still out there, wandering through other alleys toward other people, with that same twisted smile and the same whispered threat, like a distorted hymn. If you ever feel someone staring too long, or hear words that make your heart stop, don't ignore it. Some people don't just want to speak, they want you to remember, they want you to carry their fear. And sometimes, even the quietest mornings can be the beginning of a story you'll never want to tell again. In the heart of Portland, Oregon, Hannah Crowley swung a hammer with purpose, tearing down a wall in her 1920s craftsman bungalow. At 32, a freelance photographer, she'd bought the fixer-upper to start fresh after a breakup. The house was her canvas, peeling paint, sagging floors, but full of potential. She envisioned open spaces, new light, a place to call her own. Sawdust swirled as she worked, the radio blaring indie rock, drowning out the neighborhood's hum. This was her rebirth, one nail at a time. But late at night, as she rested on the couch, she caught fleeting shapes, small, childlike figures darting at the edge of her vision. They vanished when she turned, leaving only the creak of old wood. Hannah blamed exhaustion, her eyes playing tricks after long days. Yet the glimpses persisted, always in corners, always quick. She laughed it off, telling herself old houses had quirks. But the air felt heavier after dark, like someone else was breathing in the room. The joy of her project began to fray, tinged with a quiet dread she couldn't name. Hannah kept working, prying up floorboards and painting walls, but the shapes grew bolder. They moved fast, flickering in her peripheral vision, too small to be adults, too silent to be real. She'd spin around, heart racing, only to find empty rooms, her paint cans untouched. At first, she thought it was dust motes catching the light, but they had form. Tiny limbs, blurred faces, gone in a blink. They favored the hallway, where the old wallpaper peeled like skin, curling toward the floor. One night, she set up her camera, hoping to catch something concrete. The footage showed nothing but static and bursts, though she'd heard giggles, high, fleeting while recording. She checked the attic, finding only cobwebs and a child's shoe, its leather cracked, too small for any kid she knew. Hannah's sleep grew fitful, her dreams filled with skittering feet behind walls. She told a friend, who suggested rats, but Hannah knew better. These weren't animals. The house seemed to hum at night, a low pulse she felt in her bones. Mirrors reflected odd angles, showing doorways slightly ajar when they weren't. Hannah started leaving lights on, but bulbs flickered, casting shadows that danced without source. She wasn't alone, and whatever shared her home didn't want her to forget it. Hannah pushed through, gutting the kitchen and opening the living room. The house transformed. Bright, airy, hers. But with every wall she broke, the shapes grew sharper. When the renovations finished, the small figures returned, more vivid, as if the changes had stirred them. She'd see them at dusk, crouched, near the new fireplace or darting up the stairs, their outlines clearer, tiny hands, matted hair. They didn't look at her, but their presence pressed like a weight on her chest. She dug into the house's past, visiting Portland's archives. A 1930s record mentioned a family who'd lived there. 3 children, all dead in a flu outbreak, buried in unmarked graves. The librarian whispered of rumors, kids who never left, tied to the house's bones. Hannah found a photo in the basement, tucked behind a pipe, small faces unsmiling, standing where her couch now sat. Her camera caught more, faint smudges in photos like fingerprints on light. One night she woke to scratching under the floor, rhythmic, like nails on wood. She tore up a board, finding a bundle of cloth dolls, their eyes sewn shut, reeking of mildew. The air turned cold and Hannah swore she heard a whisper. Hours. She burned the dolls, but the shapes didn't stop. They lingered, watching, as if the house was theirs, not hers. Hannah stopped inviting friends over, the house's secret too heavy to share. She felt uneasy, convinced the figures were supernatural, tied to the house's past. Sleep came in fragments, broken by footsteps, tiny, deliberate, circling her bed. She tried talking to them, asking what they wanted, but only silence answered, followed by a faint tap like fingers on glass. She hung sage, sprinkled salt, but the shapes slipped through, unbothered, their shadows pooling in doorways. She hired a medium who sensed grief, not malice, saying the children were bound here unfinished. The medium left quickly, eyes wide, refusing payment. Hannah found more. A diary page under the stairs in childish scrawl listing names: Clara, Amos, Ruth, and a plea: don't change it. The renovations, she realized, had disturbed their rest, cracking whatever held them quiet. Her photos now caught them openly, small forms in the kitchen, their eyes black pits, staring at her lens. Hannah stayed, too stubborn to leave her dream. But one night, painting the hall, she saw them fully. 3 tiny figures, hand in hand. At the stairs' top, their faces pale, mouths open in silent wails. She dropped her brush, paint splattering like blood. The next morning, her camera held a new image. Hannah asleep, the children around her bed, their hands on her blanket claiming her as part of their home. Moving into a new house always comes with a mix of excitement and unease, like opening a book without knowing where the story will lead. My name is Elise, 28 years old. I had just signed the lease on an old house in the suburbs of Seattle, tucked along tree-lined streets and surrounded by wooden homes echoing a bygone era. I was the new tenant, eager at the idea of turning this 2-story house into my own cozy haven. It wasn't perfect. The wooden floors creaked, the paint peeled from the walls, and a faint mustiness lingered in the air. But the rent was cheap, and I figured I could fix it up over time. That first night, lying on my newly bought bed, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains, I felt like life was beginning a new chapter. But even then, I sensed the house wasn't welcoming me the way I had imagined. The house held a strange kind of silence, not the peaceful kind meant for rest, but the kind that felt like something was waiting. The first floor, with its small living room and vintage kitchen, felt relatively normal, although the cold flicker of the fluorescent lights made everything seem slightly sterile. But the second floor, with the bedroom and a small study, was different. The staircase leading up was narrow and dark, each step groaning beneath my feet, like it was whispering a story I didn't want to hear. I unpacked my belongings, books, clothes, a few framed prints. But every time I climbed those stairs, I felt a coldness I couldn't explain, like the air was thicker, heavier. One night as I was reading in bed, I felt it. A sudden sharp awareness that I wasn't alone. It was like being watched. A gaze I couldn't locate coming from somewhere, deep in the shadows upstairs. I stopped reading and listened, but there was only the sound of wind slipping through the window crack. I looked around. Nothing but the swaying overhead bulb, and my own shadow stretching across the wall. But the feeling didn't leave. It clung to me, like a cold hand brushing the back of my neck. I told myself I was tired, imagining things, that old houses often played tricks on the mind. But as I stepped toward the window to close it, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, clear as day, coming from the hallway just outside. My heart pounded. I froze, listening again. The footsteps creaked along the second floor, soft but steady, as though someone was pacing back and forth. I opened the door and peeked out into the dark hallway, lit only by the faintest silver glow from the window at the end. There was no one, nothing, but the floorboards still creaked, like they were responding to something unseen. Turned on the lights and checked every corner. Empty, just the smell of old wood and dust. I returned to my room, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But all night I could feel that gaze again, not in one place, but everywhere. Like the house itself was watching me. The days that followed only grew stranger. One morning, I found the study window wide open, though I was certain I had shut and locked it the night before. The wind tossed the curtains wildly, and on the desk, a notebook I'd left untouched was now opened to a different page, like someone had been reading it. I checked all the locks, front door, back door. Everything was still secure. Another night, I found a small mirror from my bedroom no longer hanging on the wall, but face down on the floor, as if it had been turned to avoid reflecting something. These oddities made me wonder if the house was trying to say something. I'm not superstitious, but I couldn't explain any of it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't imagination. It felt real. I started asking around about the house, talking to neighbors and the landlord. The landlord, an elderly man living a few miles away, only told me that the house had been empty for years before I moved in, and that it just needed some love to come back to life. But one elderly neighbor, when I mentioned feeling watched, gave me a strange look. She said somewhat vaguely that someone who used to live upstairs had troubles, but she wouldn't elaborate, only told me to be careful. I searched online, digging through public records and archives, but all I found were vague references to an incident years ago. No clear details, only a passing mention of the old wooden house on Elm Street. I tried to face it, set up cameras in the bedroom and hallway, but they captured nothing but darkness and the sound of wind. I bought extra locks, checked the windows every night, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It only grew stronger. As though the longer I stayed, the closer I got to something I didn't want to meet. I started avoiding the second floor after sunset, but I couldn't leave. The lease had 6 months left, and I couldn't afford to move. I started sleeping on the living room couch downstairs, dragging it in front of the door for a small sense of safety. But even there, I heard the creaks on the stairs, as if the second floor was calling me back. I don't know what's happening upstairs. I don't know if it's the house, my mind, or something I can't name. The fear has changed me. I now constantly look over my shoulder, constantly check the shadows. I'm still here, writing this under dim light, but every little noise, a branch tapping the window, a gust of wind, makes me flinch. This house has a secret, and I'm afraid that if I stay long enough, I'll find out what it is, even though I'm not sure I want to. If you've ever felt a stare you can't explain, or heard a sound that doesn't belong in your home, don't ignore it. Some places aren't just homes. They hold on to what came before. They keep the stares that never leave. And on some nights, no matter how tightly you shut your eyes, something is still waiting for you to open them. In a quaint suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the Harper family's 2-story home glowed with the soft light of evening. Kristen Harper, a 36-year-old nurse, tucked her 9-year-old daughter Sophie into bed, the room adorned with star decals and a plush teddy bear. Sophie's father, Greg, a software engineer, read her a chapter from a fantasy novel, his voice steady as she snuggled under the quilt. These moments were sacred, a shield against the world's chaos, binding them closer after a long day. But that night, as Sophie lay in the dark, she heard faint footsteps pattering across her bedroom floor. At first, she thought it was the cat, Milo, but the steps were heavier, deliberate, circling her bed. She clutched her bear, eyes wide, scanning the shadows. The house was still, her parents' voices a distant murmur downstairs. Yet the sound persisted, slow and rhythmic like bare feet on wood. Sophie whispered for Milo, but he wasn't there. A chill crept over her, the room no longer her sanctuary, but a space where something else stirred, unseen. Sophie didn't sleep that night, her ears straining for every sound. The footsteps returned, closer, as if pacing just beyond her bed frame. She froze, heart pounding when she felt the mattress dip, like something small climbed onto her bed. The quilt tugged slightly, as if pulled by tiny hands, but when she yanked it back, nothing was there, only the dark, thick and heavy. She flicked on her lamp, its glow revealing only her toys, yet the air felt wrong, like someone had just left. She told Kristen the next morning, her voice small. Kristen checked the room, finding nothing. No Milo, no open windows. Greg suggested creaky floors, but Sophie insisted it wasn't the house. That night, Kristen stayed until Sophie dozed off. But Sophie woke again, the steps louder, circling, faster. She saw a shadow flicker near her closet, low to the ground, too small for a person. Her lamp flickered, and a faint scratch came from under the bed, like nails on wood. Sophie stopped sleeping alone, curling up in her parents' room. But even there, she heard whispers. Not words, but breaths, soft and quick, trailing off into giggles. Kristen found Sophie's teddy bear under the bed, its eyes scratched out, though Sophie swore she hadn't touched it. The house, once their haven, now hummed with secrets, and Sophie's fear began to seep into her parents. Sophie's stories shook Kristen and Greg. She was terrified, describing the footsteps to them, begging to sleep with the lights on. They searched the house, checking vents and locks, but found no explanation. Greg installed a baby monitor, hoping to ease Sophie's fears, but its static crackled with odd sounds, shuffles, faint taps, like someone testing the floor. Kristen caught Sophie drawing the footsteps path, a spiral around her bed, ending at her pillow. Kristen researched the house's history at the local library, uncovering a grim tale. In the 1950s, a child had died in their home, a boy named Tommy. Lost to illness, his room, Sophie's room, sealed after. Neighbors claimed his playmates lingered, unseen friends he'd spoken of before passing. Kristen shivered, recalling Sophie's insistence that it wants to play. Back home, the monitor caught a whisper, "Stay," though Sophie was asleep downstairs. Greg set up a camera, but the footage glitched, showing only a blur near Sophie's bed, like a smudge of light with arms. Kristen found a toy car under Sophie's pillow, rusted and old, not hers. The air in the room grew, cold at night, the thermostat useless. Sophie began humming a tune, one Kristen didn't know, her eyes distant. The family's warmth frayed, replaced by a dread that something was claiming Sophie's space, and maybe Sophie herself. Kristen and Greg tried everything, new locks, sage, even a priest's blessing. But the footsteps followed Sophie. They worried it was supernatural, unsure how to protect her. Sophie grew pale, barely eating, saying, "He's lonely," when asked about the steps. Kristen found scratches on Sophie's door, tiny, like claw marks, too low for an adult. Greg's camera caught more, a shadow crawling across Sophie's ceiling, its limbs bent wrong, vanishing when the light hit. They contacted a medium who sensed a child, not alone, tied to the house's grief. During the session, Sophie screamed, pointing at her mirror. Its glass rippled, showing a boy's face, eyes hollow, beckoning. The medium fled, warning of others who'd joined Tommy. Kristen dug deeper, finding a 1950s diary in the attic, Tommy's, listing friends, with no names, ending with "they're mine now." Sophie's humming matched a song from that era, eerie and slow. The Harpers planned to move, but that night, Sophie sleepwalked, standing in her room, whispering to the dark. Kristen pulled her away, but the bed creaked, as if something settled in her place. They left for a hotel, but Sophie's backpack held a new drawing. A boy with jagged teeth holding her hand, labeled, "Forever Friend." Back home, the camera still ran, streaming live to Greg's phone. Sophie's empty bed. But the quilt moved, rising slowly, like someone small was climbing up, waiting for her return. In the hotel, Sophie slept better, but Kristen and Greg stayed vigilant. They rented a new house across town, hoping distance would break the hold. Sophie stopped humming, her drawings now of flowers, not shadows. But Kristen couldn't forget the camera feed, shutting it off only after they left. She burned Sophie's old toys, fearing they carried traces of Tommy's friends. The diary, locked in a box, seemed to hum faintly when she passed it, though Greg swore it was her imagination. Weeks later, Sophie seemed herself, laughing again, but Kristen noticed oddities. The new house's faucet dripped at night, leaving stains like rust. Sophie's new teddy bear moved from shelf to floor untouched. Kristen checked the attic, finding a small dusty ball, not theirs, etched with T. She threw it out. But Sophie whispered one night, "He misses me." Kristen's blood ran cold. The tune was back, faint, from Sophie's lips. One evening, unpacking, Kristen found a photo in Sophie's bag, her old room, taken from above, showing Sophie asleep, a blurry shape beside her, its hand on her quilt. The camera's timestamp was after they'd left. That night in the new house, Kristen woke to soft steps, circling downstairs. She held Sophie close, listening as the sound climbed the stairs, pausing at their door, where a giggle, small, sharp, promised it wasn't over. Rain fell relentlessly, turning the streets of Denver into a blurry painting, where neon lights bled like ink on wet paper. My name is Nora, 26 years old. I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. I'm disabled, have been using a wheelchair since I was 15, after an accident, and I usually take a taxi home at night after my late shifts at the library. That night, April 16th, 2025, I left the library late, past 11 o'clock, and the downpour made waiting for a bus impossible. I called a cab, relieved when the yellow glow of its headlights broke through the rain, promising a safe ride home. But the moment I got in, I didn't know that this ride would change how I saw the world, how I understood that safety is sometimes just a thin illusion. Rain slammed against the windows, creating a chaotic rhythm, as if the sky itself was trying to warn me. I sat in the back seat, my folded wheelchair beside me, phone in hand, displaying a message from a coworker. "Get home safe." I smiled, thinking in just 30 more minutes I'd be home, curled up in a blanket with a hot cup of tea. The taxi was old, the smell of leather mixed with stale cigarette smoke, but I didn't mind. I just wanted out of the cold and away from the endless rain. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a dark blue jacket, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and gave a polite smile. "Terrible night, huh?" he said, his voice low and gravelly, like he'd been talking all day. I nodded, returning the courtesy. "Yeah, this rain's a nightmare." He chuckled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes, and I noticed them, sharp, assessing, like he was sizing me up. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was being overly cautious. Not everyone meant harm. We passed through empty streets, streetlights flickering through the windows, casting soft, smeared lines of light. I stared out, trying to focus on the rain, but then the driver's voice cut through my thoughts. "You out this late often?" It was a casual question, but it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. "Only sometimes when I have late shifts," I replied, keeping my answer short. He nodded, hands gripping the wheel tightly, and that's when I noticed he hadn't turned on the meter. It was a small thing, but enough. I checked my phone, planning to text a friend, but the signal was weak. My screen flickered. The driver started talking again, voice slow and steady, like telling a story he'd rehearsed. "You know," he said, "night is a strange time. People think they're safe, but that's when things come out. The secrets, the darker thoughts." I gave a weak laugh, unsure how to respond, hoping he was just trying to make small talk. But then his story twisted, like a snake sliding through the grass. He began to talk about murder, calmly, casually, like talking about the weather. "You ever thought about taking someone's life?" he asked. His eyes stayed on the road, but I could feel them on me through the mirror, like a blade brushing my skin. "Not out of anger," he continued. "Just curiosity. Wondering what it feels like when someone stops breathing because of you." My heart pounded. I clenched the seat, trying to steady my voice. I don't think like that," I said, hoping he'd stop, but he didn't. He leaned in, voice lower now, a poisonous whisper. "I once picked up a girl," he said. "She looked like you." Sat there in silence. I thought, if I turned down a dark alley, if I stopped the car, no one would know. The air in the cab thickened, like the oxygen was gone. Then he turned, looked straight at me and said, "I could kill you right now. No one would ever know." The words hit like a punch. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. His eyes didn't blink. Dark, empty, like bottomless wells, in his smile, slow, twisted, made me want to scream. I looked out the window, desperate for a sign of life. Another car, a passerby. But there was only rain, only darkness. We were in an old industrial district now. Abandoned warehouses slipping past the windows, no lights in sight. That's when I realized he wasn't taking me home, and the fear inside me erupted, sharp as a knife. You missed the turn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled. "Missed? No. I know where I'm going." I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking. It fell to the floor, out of reach. I thought fast. I couldn't run. I couldn't open the door myself. My wheelchair was folded beside me, useless. But I had to do something. "Stop the car," I said, voice harder now, though my chest thudded with panic. "I want to get out." He didn't answer right away, just looked at me through the mirror. Still, smiling. "Relax," he said. "I'm just joking." Or, did you think I was serious? But there was no humor in his voice. And I knew he wasn't joking. I bent down, pretending to reach for my phone, really searching for anything. I could use keys, a pen, something to defend myself. Then, suddenly, headlights from an oncoming car cut through the rain, lighting up the cabin. The driver swore, eyes snapping back to the road. I saw my chance. I slammed my hand against the window and screamed, knowing no one could hear me through the storm. "Let me out," I shouted. Maybe it was the lights, maybe it was my voice, but something made him hesitate. He pulled to the side of a deserted street near a closed-down gas station. "Get out," he said. Cold. As if I had disturbed him. I opened the door, pulled my wheelchair out, nearly dropping it as my hands trembled, and rolled into the darkness, never looking back. I called the police from a convenience store a few blocks away, after convincing a stranger to help me. I was shaking, terrified. His voice haunted me, his story, his stare. The police took my report, but the taxi was gone. No plates, no trace, like it never existed. They said maybe he was trying to scare me, but his eyes, those eyes weren't joking. Since then, I never take a cab alone. I don't go out late, and every engine sound makes me jump, like he might return, with that same smile and that same deadly whisper. In the weeks that followed, I heard whispers about a cab driver in Denver, a man who told strange stories then vanished. No one knows if it's true, but I don't need proof. I heard the truth in his voice. I saw it in his gaze, like I was a question he wanted to answer with. Blood. What happened that night left a mark. Now I check my locks twice. I always glance behind me. I still live. I still work. But part of me changed. The part that believed the world was safe, that people meant well. If you ever feel someone knows too much about you, or hear words that make your skin crawl, trust your instincts. Some people don't just want to take you somewhere. They want to take you into their darkness. And sometimes, that darkness never lets go. I escaped that night, but I still hear the rain, and I wonder, is he driving someone else now? With that same stare and that same whispered promise of death? Rain lashed against the windows of a modest ranch house in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits. 11-year-old Caleb Monroe sat cross-legged on the living room couch, a flashlight in hand, the power flickering. From the storm, his dad, Ryan, a truck driver, was on a late delivery, leaving Caleb alone for the first time overnight. The boy felt grown up, armed with a pizza box and a sci-fi movie paused on the TV. Thunder rumbled, but Caleb's confidence held. He could handle a night solo. Yet as the clock neared midnight, he was alone in the house, the storm masking all, but the loudest sounds. A sharp bang jolted him. Not thunder, but a fist on the front door. Caleb froze, the flashlight beam trembling. The banging grew frantic, paired with a slurred voice yelling through the rain. He crept to the window, peering through the blinds. A man stood on the porch soaked, his face twisted in rage, fists pounding the wood. Caleb's heart raced. This wasn't a neighbor or a lost traveler. Something about the man's voice felt personal, dangerous, like a grudge had found its way to their doorstep. Caleb ducked below the window, his breath shallow. The man hammered the door, shouting, his words thick with alcohol, demanding to see Caleb's dad. "Ryan, you owe me, you coward!" he bellowed, voice raw, slurring through the storm. Caleb's stomach twisted. His dad had never mentioned anyone like this. The door rattled under the blows, the lock holding but creaking. Caleb grabbed his phone, hands shaking, but the signal was dead, the storm cutting him off. He crawled to the kitchen, where Ryan kept a baseball bat. The man's shouts grew wilder, now cursing Ryan's name, accusing him of stealing work, ruining lives. Caleb peeked through the curtains. A pickup truck sat crooked in the driveway, its headlights slicing the rain. illuminating the man's silhouette. He was broad, unsteady, his jacket torn, a bottle dangling from one hand. The porch light flickered, casting his face in jagged shadows, eyes glinting with fury. Something crashed, a flower pot smashed against the siding. Caleb flinched, clutching the bat. He remembered Ryan's advice. Stay calm, think fast. But the man's voice turned low, menacing, promising to settle this tonight. Caleb checked the back door, locked, but the window beside it rattled, as if tested. Footprints smeared the glass, muddy and large, not washed away by rain. The house, his fortress, felt like a trap. And Caleb realized this wasn't just a drunk rant. This was revenge, and he was in its path. Caleb's hands sweated on the bat, his mind racing. He was terrified, heart pounding, trying to figure out how to keep the man out. The banging stopped, but footsteps crunched outside, circling the house. Caleb darted to the living room, shoving a chair under the front door's knob. He flicked off the TV, plunging the room into near darkness, the storm's roar filling the silence. The man's voice came again, now at a side window, muttering, "I know you're in there, kid." Caleb remembered a neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, a block away. He grabbed Ryan's old walkie-talkie, praying it worked. Static hissed, but her voice crackled through, faint. "Caleb? What's wrong?" He whispered about the man, begging her to call the police. The walkie cut out, leaving him alone again. A scrape sounded at the back door, metal on metal like a tool prying the lock. Caleb's flashlight caught a glint through the blinds, a crowbar in the man's hand, gleaming wet. He hid in the hall closet, bat raised, the air thick with dust and fear. The man's muttering grew clearer, laced with names. Ryan, a job gone wrong, money lost. Caleb pieced it together. A fired coworker maybe, blaming Ryan for his downfall. Thunder masked a splintering sound, the back door giving way. Caleb held his breath, the walkie silent, praying Mrs. Ellis had heard him. The house groaned under the storm, but the real threat was inside now, footsteps heavy on the kitchen floor. The kitchen floor creaked closer now, the man's boots dragging. He was inside, still yelling for Ryan, his anger spilling into every word. "You can't hide forever!" he roared, glass shattering, maybe a lamp, maybe a frame. Caleb pressed against the closet wall, the bat useless in his trembling hands. The man's shadow loomed through the door's slats, his breath ragged, reeking of whiskey and rain. Caleb's eyes stung with tears, but he bit his lip, refusing to cry out. Then a new sound, sirens, faint but growing. Mrs. Ellis had come through. The man cursed, stumbling, knocking over a chair. Caleb heard him lurch toward the back door, but something fell, a wallet slapping the floor. The sirens wailed closer and the footsteps faded, the man fleeing into the storm. Caleb waited, counting seconds, until blue lights flashed through the blinds. He crept out, legs shaking, to find the kitchen trashed. Muddy prints, a broken bottle, and the wallet, open to a faded ID. Frank Kessler, a name Ryan would know. Police searched the yard, finding no one, but Caleb overheard them. Kessler, a former driver, fired for theft, had sworn revenge on Ryan months ago. The wallet held a photo, creased and old, of Kessler with a kid Caleb's age, smiling. Caleb clutched it, wondering if Kessler's rage hid something deeper, something broken. The house felt violated, its safety shattered, and Caleb knew he'd never feel alone in it the same way again. Ryan rushed home before dawn. Pale when he saw the damage, he held Caleb tight, apologizing for leaving him alone, promising it wouldn't happen again. The police took Kessler's wallet, tracking him to a bar miles away, but he'd vanished, no arrest made. Ryan admitted Kessler's grudge, a botched job. Ryan's report leading to his firing, but swore it was over. Caleb nodded, wanting to believe it, but the house's silence felt wrong now, its corners too dark, its locks too weak. They boarded the back door, added alarms, but Caleb couldn't sleep. He'd hear rain and tense, expecting bangs. Kristen found muddy smudges in the garage, not police tracks, too fresh for that night. Caleb kept the walkie close, its static a comfort, but one night it crackled unprompted. A voice, not Mrs. Ellis, whispering, "I'll be back." He unplugged it, heart hammering, telling no one. Ryan noticed Caleb's jumpiness, blaming himself, and started working shorter routes. Weeks later, Caleb found a note under his bed, scrawled on a torn receipt. "Tell your dad he's not done." It smelled of whiskey, its edges damp as if left in the rain. He burned it, afraid to show Ryan, but at night, he'd check the windows, seeing nothing, yet feeling eyes in the storm. The house stood firm, but Caleb sensed Kessler out there, waiting, his anger a shadow that hadn't faded, ready to pound the door again when the next storm hit. The Arizona desert at night is another world, a place where the sky is strewn with stars like scattered diamonds on black velvet, but the ground below is cold, uneasy, whispering stories no one dares to hear. My name is Owen, 32 years old. Together with two friends, Maya and Lucas, we decided to spend the weekend camping and hunting in the wild terrain near Tucson. We were an outdoor group, excited by the idea of escaping the city and soaking in the freedom of the desert. It was April 16th, 2025. We set up camp near a large rock formation, where the wind carried the scent of dry earth and cactus blooms. The campfire crackled, casting warm orange light across our faces, and laughter rose as Maya recounted the time she nearly missed a rabbit last year. But as the night deepened, the desert grew unnervingly quiet, and I realized that freedom sometimes comes with a price no one talks about. We came prepared, rifles, tents, food, flashlights, and chose a campsite miles from the nearest road. No cell signal, no city lights, just nature in its rawest form. The desert by day is bright and vivid, with red hills and flawless blue skies, but at night, it transforms. The darkness is thick, almost alive, capable of swallowing you whole. Every sound, a scurrying animal, a shifting stone, feels sharper, closer. We sat around the fire, sipping beer and sharing stories, trying to keep the mood light. Lucas, who always brought a camera to capture wildlife, told us about an old legend he'd heard from a local, that strange things happened in these parts, figures vanishing in the night, voices that couldn't be explained. Maya laughed, telling him not to overdo it, but I noticed her glance toward the darkness, as if checking to make sure nothing was watching. Around midnight, we doused the fire and got ready for bed. The outdoors, air had turned icy, and our breaths curled in pale clouds beneath the faint moonlight. I was zipping up my tent when I heard it, a sound slicing through the silence, distant but sharp. It was a cry, strange, desperate. In the stillness of the desert night, we heard it again, something calling out over and over, a distorted scream repeating the word back. It didn't sound human, but it wasn't exactly an animal either, twisted, choked by wind, yet loud enough to freeze the blood in your veins. "What is that?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched her flashlight. Lucas stood up, staring out into the desert, where the blackness stretched endlessly. "Probably a fox or an owl," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sound came again, closer now, back, over and over, like a plea or a warning. It echoed across the rocks and sand, pinning us in place. I switched on my flashlight, scanning the scrub and boulders, but all I saw were shadows and shapes my mind turned into monsters. "We should check it out," Lucas said, grabbing his rifle, his eyes a mix of curiosity and fear. Maya shook her head. "That's a terrible idea. The desert at night isn't where you go playing hero." But the voice didn't stop. It kept calling. Each time, a little closer, like something was coming straight for our camp. Despite every instinct screaming otherwise, we followed the sound. Flashlights in hand, rifles ready, we moved cautiously, trying to locate its source. But the desert seemed to be playing tricks on us. Our beams cut only a few feet ahead. The wind picked up, throwing fine sand into our faces. The scream pulled us toward a narrow canyon, where massive stones stacked into natural corridors. Each step echoed, the word back repeated again and again. No footsteps, no blood, no tracks. Just that chilling call, and something deeper. A coldness that had nothing to do with the wind, as if the desert itself was watching, waiting for us to go too far. After 30 minutes of wandering, the screaming stopped. Suddenly, the silence it left behind was deafening. We stood in the canyon, flashlights flickering, breath heavy. "Where did it go?" Maya asked, her voice cracking, hands gripping her hunting knife. Lucas swept his light across the rocks, but there was nothing, only shadows. I realized how far we had strayed, far from our tents, far from the fragile safety of the campfire. "Let's go back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, images flooded my mind, something or someone waiting for us in the dark. We walked back in silence, quickening our pace. No one spoke. We only listened, to the wind, to our boots in the sand, each step haunted by the thought that we weren't alone. When we finally reached camp, everything looked untouched. Tents, gear, weapons. But the sense of safety was gone. We hadn't found anything. But that voice, it left something behind. A lingering dread, like spilled ink slowly soaking into the fabric of your thoughts. We didn't sleep. We sat with our backs to each other, rifles in hand, eyes wide, locked on the darkness. Every small sound, a lizard, a gust of wind, made us flinch, waiting for the scream to return. At sunrise, we packed up quickly. No hunting, no pictures. We just wanted to leave. On the way back, Maya got signal and looked up old stories. She read about strange cases in Arizona, people vanishing in the desert, unexplained cries the locals called the voice of the land. One article mentioned a group of campers a decade ago who heard something similar. No one ever looked too deep into it, because the desert is vast and its secrets are often ignored. Lucas, usually the jokester, was silent the whole drive, and I knew. He felt what I felt, that the scream wasn't just sound, it was a warning, a message, one that told us we didn't belong. I never went back after that. No more camping, no more hunting. That fear changed us. Now we look into the dark with doubt. I still hear the word back sometimes, when the wind slips through the window, when I'm alone and the world is too quiet. I wonder what it meant. A cry for help? A threat? Or just the desert speaking in a language only it understands? Some say it was just animals or wind through stone. But I know what I heard, what I felt. And it's not something you explain away and forget. If you ever hear a sound that doesn't belong, or feel the ground beneath you hum with something ancient, don't ignore it. There are places in this world, the deserts, the forests, the fields, that hold stories no one tells, sounds no one can explain. And some nights, no matter how far you run, something will still scream at you, back, even if you never want to know why. Under the neon glow of Seattle's Capitol Hill, Mason Reed leaned against the counter of his small apartment, the city's pulse humming through the open window. At 24, a barista and part-time DJ, Mason thrived on late nights, his place a hub for friends crashing after shows. Tonight he'd been texting his childhood friend Dylan Foster, who'd been dodging plans lately, caught up in family drama. When Dylan buzzed the intercom at 2 a.m., Mason grinned. Impromptu visits were their thing, a nod to their teenage years sneaking out in Tacoma. But when Dylan stumbled through the door, Mason's smile faded. His friend was shaking, his hoodie stained dark red, hands smeared with blood. Dylan's eyes were wild, darting like a trapped animal, his breath sharp with panic. Mason froze, the room's warmth draining. "What the hell happened?" he asked, voice tight. Dylan collapsed onto the couch, muttering, head in his hands, the blood leaving streaks on his face. The city's noise faded, replaced by a heavy silence, as if the apartment itself held its breath. Mason's gut twisted. This wasn't a bar fight or an accident. Something unthinkable had walked into his life, wearing his best friend's face. Mason locked the door, his hands unsteady, eyes fixed on Dylan's bloodied hoodie. "Talk to me, man," he urged, keeping his distance. Dylan looked up, voice breaking, and confessed. He'd killed his mother, Ellen, after a fight that spiraled out of control. "It wasn't me," he whispered, tears mixing with the blood on his cheeks. "She kept screaming and I snapped." Mason's knees buckled, the words hitting like a punch. Ellen, sharp-tongued but kind, who'd baked them cookies as kids, was gone, and Dylan had done it. The story spilled out in fragments. Ellen had been drinking again, her temper flaring over Dylan's jobless streak. The argument turned vicious, plates smashed, insults hurled. Dylan said he grabbed a kitchen knife, not meaning to use it, but rage took over. Mason pictured their Tacoma house, its cramped kitchen now a crime scene, blood pooling on the linoleum. Dylan's hands shook as he described hiding her body in the garage, planning to flee. He'd come to Mason for help, not forgiveness, his voice hollow with guilt. Mason's mind reeled. He saw flashes of their past, Dylan teaching him to skateboard, Ellen cheering at their games. Now his friend was a stranger, a killer. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in. Outside, a siren wailed, and Dylan flinched, his eyes pleading. Mason's phone buzzed on the counter, ignored as he grappled with the truth. His best friend was a murderer, and he was now part of this nightmare. Mason paced, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. He was stunned, torn between loyalty to Dylan and the horror of what he'd done. "You need to turn yourself in," he said, voice low, but Dylan shook his head, desperate. "They'll lock me up forever, Mason. I didn't mean it. You know, me." Mason didn't know, not anymore. The blood on Dylan's hands was Ellen's, and every second Mason stood there, he felt complicit, the weight of a choice crushing him. Dylan begged for a plan, money, a car, a place to hide. Mason's eyes flicked to his phone, a text from his sister glowing, "You okay? Heard about a fight in Tacoma?" His heart sank. Word was spreading. He remembered Ellen's laugh, her struggles with sobriety, how she'd trusted Mason with Dylan. Now Dylan pulled a crumpled photo from his pocket. Him and Ellen at a fair, smiling years ago. "She hated me," he muttered. But the photo told a different story, one Mason couldn't unsee. A knock at the door jolted them. Mason peered through the peephole, a neighbor probably checking the noise. Dylan shrank into the couch, whispering, "Don't let them in." Mason's hand hovered over the knob, his pulse racing. He could end this now, call for help, but Dylan's eyes held him, fearful, familiar. The neighbor left, but the moment clarified Mason's trap. Help Dylan and risk everything, or betray him and lose the only brother he'd ever had. Mason grabbed a towel, shoving it at Dylan to clean. The blood. The fight, Dylan admitted, had been about Ellen's drinking and his own failures, escalating until he lost control. But holes in his story emerged. He said Ellen attacked first, but his hands bore no cuts, only her blood. Mason noticed a scratch on Dylan's neck, fresh, like a fingernail's mark. "What really happened?" Mason pressed, voice hard. Dylan's eyes darkened, his story shifting. Maybe he'd pushed her. Maybe the knife wasn't an accident. Mason's phone buzzed again. A news alert. Tacoma woman found dead, suspect at large. His hands shook as he read. Ellen, stabbed, body in her garage. Dylan hadn't mentioned neighbors hearing screams, or the knife left on the counter, details now public. Mason's stomach churned. Dylan wasn't just panicked, he was lying. Maybe to himself, maybe to Mason. He spotted Dylan's backpack half open, a glint inside. A watch. Ellen's. Gold and scratched. Stolen in his flight. Sirens wailed closer, and Dylan stood, pacing, muttering about Canada. Mason's mind raced. Dylan's car was outside, probably seen. He remembered a Tacoma cop, a regular at his coffee shop, who'd know Ellen's case. The apartment's walls felt alive, pulsing with the city's judgment. Dylan grabbed Mason's arm, his grip desperate. "You're all I've got," he said, but the watch, the lies, and Ellen's ghost stood between them. Mason's choice loomed sharper now as headlights flashed through the blinds, signaling time was running out. Mason's heart pounded as the sirens grew louder, their wail cutting through Seattle's hum. He stepped back from Dylan, the towel now a blood-soaked rag on the floor. "You can't stay here," Mason said, voice steady despite his fear. Dylan's face twisted, a flash of anger breaking through his panic. "You're turning on me." After everything, he lunged for his backpack, the watch clattering out, its face cracked, glinting like an accusation. Mason saw Ellen in it, her tired smile, her fights with Dylan, her life stolen. Dylan's voice dropped, cold. "If I go down, you're coming with me. You let me in." Mason's blood ran cold. Dylan wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous, rewriting their bond into a threat. Mason grabbed his phone, thumb hovering over 911. But Dylan snatched it, smashing it against the wall. The apartment shook, or maybe it was Mason's nerves, as Dylan blocked the door, his eyes no longer his own. But something unhinged, predatory. Mason bolted for the fire escape, Dylan's footsteps thundering behind. He scrambled down the metal stairs, rain slicking his hands, the city a blur below. Dylan's shouts echoed, "You'll regret this." But tires screeched, police cars converging. Mason hit the alley, waving frantically as officers swarmed. Dylan froze on the escape, caught in the spotlight, his bloodied hoodie a beacon. Mason sank to his knees, sobbing, the weight of betrayal and survival crashing down, knowing he'd never escape the shadow of that night. Days later, Mason sat in a Tacoma police station, giving his statement. Dylan was in custody, charged with Ellen's murder, his confession to Mason sealing his fate. The cops found Ellen's body exactly as Dylan described. The knife still in the kitchen, her watch clutched in his bag. Mason's apartment was a crime scene, taped off, forcing him to crash with his sister in Bellevue. He saw Ellen's face in every shadow, her voice in every quiet moment, blaming him for not seeing Dylan's cracks sooner. He dug into Dylan's past, needing answers. Old texts revealed Dylan's growing resentment, Ellen's relapses, his own failures piling up. A neighbor mentioned Dylan's outbursts, once breaking Ellen's dishes, unnoticed by Mason, who'd been too busy with gigs. The watch haunted him most. He'd seen Ellen wear it, a gift from her own mother, now evidence in a case that tore his world apart. Mason quit DJing, the nightlife tainted, and took a desk job, craving stability. Weeks passed, but peace didn't come. Mason found a voicemail, sent hours before Dylan's arrival, his voice slurred. "You're next if you talk." The cops dismissed it as a bluff, but Mason moved. New locks, new number. One night, unpacking, he found a photo under his couch. Dylan and Ellen, her smile strained, Dylan's eyes hard with a note scrawled on the back. "Family stays close." The city's neon flickered outside, and Mason wondered if Dylan's shadow would ever let him go, lurking just beyond the next corner. Mason settled into a new apartment in Seattle's Fremont district, far from Capitol Hill's buzz. He avoided Tacoma, its memories too raw, and blocked mutual friends who asked about Dylan. The trial loomed. Mason a key witness, his testimony set to bury his old friend. He'd dream of Ellen, her hands reaching, or Dylan, free, standing at his door. Therapy helped, but the city's pulse felt like a heartbeat watching him. He kept the blinds shut. The note, "Family stays close," burned but not forgotten. Strange things started small. His keys vanished, reappearing in odd places. A coffee mug, like Ellen's favorite, appeared in his cupboard, though he'd bought none. Mason chalked it up to stress, but one night his doorbell rang. No one there, just a faint smear of red on the handle. Paint, he hoped. He checked the news. Dylan was still locked up, no bail, yet Mason's gut screamed otherwise. A barista at his old shop mentioned a guy asking for him, rough-looking, gone before questions. Late one evening, Mason woke to a text from an unknown number, a photo of his new building, taken from the street, with "See you soon" typed below. His breath caught, the city's lights flickering like eyes. He called the cops, but they found nothing, the number untraceable. Mason stood at his window, Seattle sprawling below, and felt it. A presence, not Dylan maybe, but something tied to that bloodied night, waiting to claim him as family forever close just out. There's something about a long road trip that makes you feel alive, like you're chasing freedom itself, but also small, like the world could swallow you whole if you're not careful. My name's Riley, a 32-year-old freelance photographer from Denver, hauling my gear across the Southwest for a gig shooting desert landscapes for a travel magazine. I'd been driving all day, bone-tired, and pulled over to crash in my SUV at a remote cliffside off a Utah highway, right as a storm rolled in. It was April 16th, 2025, and after 12 hours behind the wheel, my eyes were burning, my back screaming. The sky turned dark as tar, thunder rumbling like a warning, so I found a dirt pullout by a jagged cliff, where the wind howled and not a soul was in sight. I figured I'd catch a few hours of shut-eye, wait out the storm, and hit the road at dawn. But that night, that cliff showed me something that still haunts me, something that makes me wonder if I was ever truly alone out there. My SUV was my lifeline, caked in dust from miles of back roads, parked on a gravel patch overlooking a sheer drop. I reclined the driver's seat, tossed a blanket over myself and double-checked the locks, trying to feel safe in the middle of nowhere. Outside, the wind screamed through the rocks, carrying the sharp scent of wet sagebrush and ozone. Lightning cracked, lighting up the cliff's red stone walls, where twisted juniper trees looked like ghosts in the flash. I cranked the radio, hoping for some classic rock to calm my nerves, but all I got was static, like the storm was jamming the signal. My phone was down to 8% battery, no bars, and I told myself to chill. Just sleep, and it'd all be fine when the sun came up. I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to drown out the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. This cliff, gorgeous in a rugged way, felt off, like it was holding its breath between thunderclaps. I closed my eyes, picturing the shots I'd take in New Mexico, the golden hour over the mesas, but sleep wouldn't come. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, not the wind, not the rain. In the dark, through the roar of the rain, I heard a weird laugh echoing from somewhere out there, nothing like a human's. It was high-pitched, warped, like a mix of hysteria and agony, bouncing off the cliff walls, cutting through the downpour. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and fumbled for the window switch. Rain hammered the glass, blurring everything outside, but I couldn't see a thing, just darkness and streaks of water. The laugh came again, closer now, like it was moving, weaving through the storm. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and aimed it out the window, but the weak beam barely cut through the rain. "It's just the wind," I muttered, trying to talk myself down, but the laugh didn't stop. It kept going, uneven, sometimes near, sometimes far, like someone, or something, was messing with me. I checked the locks again, clutching the blanket, but any sense of safety was gone, replaced by a primal fear, like I was being hunted in a game I didn't know the rules to. Then I saw her. A lightning bolt lit up the cliff, and there she was, a woman standing maybe 20 yards from my car right at the edge of the drop. I saw a woman acting bizarre, moving unnaturally, standing stock still in the pouring rain, like the storm didn't touch her. She wore a tattered dress, soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face, and though I couldn't make out her eyes, I felt her stare. Cold, unblinking, like it was drilling through the windshield. Her movements were off, jerky, like a puppet with half its strings cut, but she stood there, arms limp, as if the rain and wind meant nothing. I froze, barely breathing, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. The laugh came again, and I knew it was her. Somehow that sound was coming from her, even though her body didn't move, like it was piped in from somewhere else, something inside her. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe she was hurt, stranded, needing help. But my gut screamed that this wasn't right. I flipped on the high beams, hoping the light would snap me out of it, but there she was, unmoving, her dress clinging to her thin frame, and then, God, I swear, a smile crept across her face, slow and wrong, like she knew I was watching. Laid on the horn, the blare ripping through the storm, hoping it'd scare her off, break this nightmare moment. But she didn't flinch, didn't run, just tilted her head, like she was listening or daring me to come out. The laugh got louder, mixing with the thunder, and I realized it wasn't just her. It was coming from the cliff itself, like the rocks and wind were laughing too. I killed the high beams, couldn't stand looking at her anymore, but her image was burned into my brain, like a photo developed in acid. I was shaking, sweat mixing with the cold, my mind racing for a way out. I turned the key, ready to peel out, storm or no storm. The engine sputtered, then died, like something was holding it back. I tried again, hands trembling, panic clawing at my chest, and the laugh was closer now, like she was right outside, though I didn't dare look. Finally, the engine roared to life and I floored it, tires spinning on wet gravel, not caring if I skidded. I just had to get away, from the cliff, the laugh, that woman. In the rear view, I caught a glimpse of nothing, just rain and darkness like she'd vanished into the storm. But the laugh followed me, echoing in my head, a sound I couldn't outrun. I drove through the night, white-knuckling the wheel too, freaked out to stop. By dawn, I rolled into a small town, pulling into a diner with neon signs and the smell of burnt coffee. That night left me shaken, a mystery I can't wrap my head around. I spilled the story to a waitress, an older woman with kind eyes but a knowing look. She didn't laugh, just nodded, and told me about a local legend. A woman who went missing near that cliff decades ago, lost in a storm. Folks say she's still out there, tied to the place, showing up when the weather turns bad, looking for someone to join her. "You're lucky you drove off," she said. "Not everyone does." I dug deeper, scouring online forums and old news, articles, but found only scraps, reports of missing hikers, strange sightings in the area, nothing solid. A Reddit thread mentioned a laughing woman seen during storms, but it was all hearsay, no proof. I don't know who she was or what, but that stare, even if I didn't see her eyes, changed me. I don't crash in my car anymore, don't pull over in the middle of nowhere, and every storm brings back that laugh. I still shoot photos, still chase the perfect shot, but I'm always checking my mirrors, always listening, terrified that one day that laugh will find me again and she won't let me go. If you've ever heard a sound that doesn't belong or seen a figure that makes your blood run cold, trust your gut. There are places out there, cliffs, highways, deserts, that hold secrets no one's meant to find. And some storms don't just bring rain, they bring something else, something that's waiting for you to look back. And there you have it, 13 stories that prove the world is a lot creepier than we like to think. From unexplained noises to faces that shouldn't be there, these tales stick with you, don't they? They make you glance over your shoulder, double-check the locks, or maybe even sleep with the lights on. But here's the thing, this is just the beginning. The shadows are full of secrets, and we've got more chilling stories waiting to be told. Each one darker, stranger, and more unsettling than the last. What's out there in the places we don't look? What's watching when we think we're alone? Stick around, because the next batch of tales will dig even deeper into the unknown. If these stories got under your skin, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your own creepy experiences, and share this with someone who loves a good scare. The night's not over yet, and neither are the mysteries. Keep your eyes open, your ears sharp, and don't miss what's coming next, because some stories don't end when the video does.